Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I really wish I would just improve faster? Like, I just wish my musical skills would improve faster. I want to become a better jazz improviser. It seems to be going so slow. I can't make progress the way I want to. Well, I've personally felt that a lot of times. I've felt like, man, I wish I could improve faster with my skills. Things aren't going fast enough. What a lot of this comes down to, though, is how we actually practice. And we know that because I talk about this all the time on the podcast. How we practice is way more important than the little tricks, the little tools, music theory, any of that. But also a big part of practicing is mindset. And if we understand our brain better, we can hack our way to really reduce the amount of time that it takes for us to improve in our musical skills. And that's why I have on the show today a psychologist as well as a professional musician, Rodney Brim, on the show to give us his 4 big tips for setting up your practice sessions for success, understanding your brain so that you can get better faster. Let's do this.
Welcome to the LJS podcast, where you get weekly jazz tips, interviews, stories, and advice for becoming a better jazz musician. And now your host. He's a jazz musician, author, and entrepreneur, Brent Bardstra.
What's up, everybody? Brent here from LearnJazzStandards.com, which is a blog, podcast, and videos all geared towards helping you become a better jazz musician. Listen, I'm here to serve you today. I'm here to help you become a better jazz musician, jazz improviser, and no matter where you're at on your journey right now, there is something that you can learn from this podcast, and I guarantee you on today's episode, where we do have a special guest actually, who is a listener of this show. And it's really cool when listeners of the show reach out to me and they say, hey, Brent, guess what? I have something really valuable to share with the audience as well. I'm an expert in this arena. In episode 91, we had Joe Agu, who was talking about understanding African music and the origins of jazz. And then also in episode 138, we had Christian Steinader, who's a listener of the podcast, talk about Alexander technique. And now, today, I'm welcoming on the show Rodney Brim, who's a psychologist. He's going to talk to us about how we can think and how we can train our brain in the practice room so that we can get better results faster. And this isn't just some marketing talking point. This is real stuff from an actual psychologist who absolutely lays down a ton of value today. You're going to want to stick to the very end of this episode. You can learn more about Rodney at his website, rodneybrim.bandzoogle.com, to learn more about him. Also, all the links that he talks about, books, resources. You can find the show notes today at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 159. We talk about a lot of great stuff today, particularly his 4 main tips. His 4 main tips for brain hacking for speeding up your jazz improv success. All right, without further ado, let's get on Rodney Brim. All right, I'm excited to welcome on the show today. We have a psychologist and a professional musician. This is Rodney Brim. Rodney, thanks for being here on the show.
Brent, great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Really excited. I really enjoy when listeners of the show reach out to me and say, hey, Brent, I have something valuable to offer to everybody. I know something. And I love that because I like having guests on my show in general to teach things that I don't know or to think, to have a different perspective on something. And I think it's even better when it's actually someone who's listening. So that's so cool, Rodney. Thank you so much for reaching out. I like to always start by just getting everybody to know you a little bit better. So why don't we just start out with who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit about your musical background, how you got into all that.
Yeah, fantastic. I was thinking in terms of relating to people who are listening today, I started out taking piano when I was 5. My mom was a piano teacher, and sort of did that sort of stuff. Got into band at 10 and fell in love with the trombone. Played through college. Got to play with some great people. I had one of those kind of monumental pivot points in my music career at probably 20. Got to play with Benny Goodman and was working out front with him and got a nice compliment from him. And it changed for me. I looked at that experience and I thought I didn't see a great future for me as a musician in terms of I was afraid I'd turn into a high school music teacher and be teaching a band forever and a day and playing the same fight song year after year on the football field. Or I'd end up gigging and I thought I'd be on the road all the time. And here's Benny and he's still on the road gigging with me and he's in his 60s and he's doing this. And so not that was bad, it's just that those weren't the career choices I want. So I I made a pivot and went ahead and got a PhD in psychology, and actually did my dissertation on music and proved that music gets underneath everyone's skin, unlike any other stimulus that we experience. So it was a great study. I had a lot of fun with the research. Went on to be a clinical psychologist, kind of put the music on a background and played casual gigs, different bands and stuff like that throughout the years. And over the last 40 years, been a psychologist, consultant, kind of had an opportunity to work all over the world. And I'm back at this point in sort of a comeback player, where I play multiple instruments and play local gigs, playing mostly in jazz flavor.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about, you said something that kind of stood out to me, that music gets underneath people's skin more than any other stimulus. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, everyone's character structure or personality structure is such that they respond to some things that you could almost rate people as either high responders. You'll notice them, they're very effervescent or very emotional about stuff. Things seem to impact them emotionally very strongly. And other people are sort of very cool, kind of maybe aloof, or nothing seems to faze them, if you describe that. What's interesting is that you'll get all sorts of emotional stimuli coming in. You get high responders, low responders. When music comes in, everyone responds. And I was able to prove using biofeedback and other sorts of sensory stuff that no one can defend against music. It gets underneath everyone's skin. Wow,
that's phenomenal. That's really fantastic. I feel like I can just relate to what you're saying just by experience, that is indeed true. So you are a psychologist. If there's anything that I know about music, is that it is intensely psychological, especially, by the way, if we're talking about the genre of jazz, which is based on improvisation, which is based on putting yourself out there, which is based on being vulnerable, which is based on having a level of playing that sometimes can seem a little daunting at times, although I always argue on this show and other things, it doesn't have to be. But we know it's intensely psychological. And so we have a psychologist on the show today, you, to help us walk through some things. What do you really want everybody listening to get out of this conversation that we have today?
Well, you just introduced one of the points I'd like people to get, and that is, so how do you manage the psychological aspect of improvising and playing jazz? And that involves some things I'd like to share about how the brain works best. So it's really play and practice in a brain-friendly way. It's absolutely will improve your game. Part of that also is your self-talk. So what are you doing? What are you thinking and saying to yourself? And then I really want to talk a little bit about using your left versus your right side of your brain. I would guarantee that most of your listeners don't use the right side of the brain well enough, and it's actually fundamental in terms of having success at improvisation.
Interesting. Well, let's jump right into this. I know that you have those several talking points that you want to talk about. Where do you want to start to talk about? We're talking about getting our brain in the right place for optimal practice. What's kind of this first stepping point that we can start talking about today?
Yeah, that's if you took one thing away, you would want to understand about the brain. The brain learns best when it's having fun. Our brain, my brain, your brain, everyone listening's brain. So if you set up your practice or your learning experience, your learning curve in a way that's arduous and not fun, you don't help your brain learn quickly. And so stuff is going to come slower. You're just going to learn slower, and you're going to be more frustrated. You're going to experience a lot of frustration, and practice inevitably hits our sort of threshold of competency. So it's always kind of flirting with the sense of being frustrated versus excited about what we're doing. So some things listeners can do is to really realize, okay, my brain needs to have fun for me to actually accelerate at this and excel at playing jazz and particularly at improvising. So how do I make it fun?
Yeah.
And there's some really easy things to do about making fun. So one of it is simply keep it fun. And so one of the ways I make practicing fun is I use fun backing tracks like your backing tracks. Why? Because it's a lot more fun to play against a backing track than simply play scales against nothing. Choose backing tracks of songs you like. Why? Because the brain likes that, so it's fun. Listen to people that you enjoy listening to and kind of replay what they play. Why? Because the brain likes what they're doing with their sound. So anything you can sort of address where the brain enjoys doing it, and you could put that into your practice, you're going to accelerate your learning curve. Here's something else. If you could talk about your self-talk, the way you think about things as you listen, and you could take your self-talk out of you and put it as an instructor and sort of embody it sort of separate from you, would that instructor be pretty affirming, or mostly notice things you screwed up on, or slow to give compliments and go, oh, good grief, you still didn't hit those high notes, or are you still going to play A sharp? It's like your self-talk is really critical for having fun as well. So watch your self-talk and in fact, change your self-talk or shape that so that you get more positives in than negatives. Because once the curves, in fact, for me, I'm a person that needs about 3 positives for every negative to learn well. I need lots of recognition, and I'm willing to go to the moon and back if I just get enough recognition. So for all of us when we're practicing, it's sort of the same sort of stuff. Would you start paying attention to the things you're doing right and recognize those? Because the brain will have more fun. You'll have more fun.
Okay, I want to touch on that a little further. I want to get into how we can have better self-talk. Really quickly, I want to go back a little bit further to something that you said was pick jazz standards or material you want to learn that you like, that you enjoy. Learn jazz solos or learn whatever you want that you actually like. And this is something that I frequently actually tell my students in my courses because sometimes people ask me, well, Brent, which jazz standards should I learn in this course? And the answer is the ones that you really like, because I think about all the tunes that I've ever learned, and I've learned a lot of tunes, and how many of those do I actually remember? Well, a lot of those tunes I learned because someone forced me to, or because I had to. I didn't really connect with them. And guess how many of those I know now? I don't know very many of them now, of the ones that were forced upon me. So that totally resonates. I love this. Now, as far as that self-talk, you mentioned a few things here. But I feel like this is easier said than done, right? This is some cognitive skills that we have to engage in. How do we start reprogramming our mind? Because I have a feeling that a lot of our self-talk, a lot of our inner instructors, as you alluded to there, are really mean, horrible, nasty teachers. So how do we turn that around?
Starting with being mindful of it. So it moves from an unconscious or just a habit that I do, and I just sort of growl at myself when I miss a note or don't quite get the inflection correct, to beginning to pay attention to that. And so as I stop making it unconscious, I make it conscious, and at a point that's conscious, then I can do something about it. So then I can start saying, okay, so Rodney, as you're playing this next one, I want you to notice at least 3 times you hit a note where the intonation is perfect and you really like the resonance. And so I just start coaching myself as to what things I want to pay attention to. And if I don't, or if I struggle to recognize that, and we'll talk a little bit about this future, but recording is just another great way to record yourself, listen back, and then force yourself to listen for things that you really enjoyed about you, that you did, and notice those and make your brain start paying attention, noticing things, even if it's one note in a phrase that I really like that particular G. Wow, I hit that one just right, and it fit in the groove.
I absolutely love that. And doesn't that just turn things on its head? Because normally when we listen back to things, normally when we're playing, the first place we want to go, and from my personal experience, is, well, that's what went wrong. That's what went wrong because that needs to get better and that needs to get fixed and it's not good enough. And that's such a different way of thinking, a way of thinking. I love that. A way of thinking of like, no, first, what actually went right? That's amazing. And, one thing that I always ask my 30 Steps to Better Jazz playing students about is I tell them to post their big win, something that went really well in the practice room during their particular session. And I see just a whole ton of comments of people saying these positive things that have happened. And man, what a game changer when people are focusing on that. So this is value-packed stuff, Rodney. Thank you so much. So It sounds to me, okay, the first, if we're going to start brain hacking our way to better practicing, to learning more, becoming better jazz improvisers, we need to be having fun. So that sounds like big tip number 1. Our brains learn best when we're having fun. What's next? Where do we go from here?
Actually, we sort of touched on that with recording, so let me go there next.
Yes.
So, the cerebrum is basically in the back of your brain, and it controls a lot of your unconscious movement. So I'm not a guitar player, but I play brass and woodwinds and keyboard, but particularly in brass and woodwinds, if you think about all the things your mouth does to shape the tone, and the subtle changes it makes to go from G to A, for instance, up to B natural, it's sort of like, oh yeah, how much did your tongue move? You have no idea how all those, it's sort of like this cerebrum part of your brain knows, and it's paying attention, and it makes those subtle adjustments, and it's starting to build patterns so that every time it moves a certain way, you get a G out as you're playing. So all this goes on, and it's a part of your brain that actually does well with practice and feedback. And I should really say this, repetition and feedback. So part of what happens if you want to help, again, you sort of learn and to improvise it and get a good sound that you enjoy. Because when I'm improvising, I'm looking for a sound that actually moves me more than makes technical sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's what moves the audience as well. The audience doesn't really care how fast I play for the most part, but they do care if I play in a way that actually moves me and moves them, and that connects. So here's how do we help the cerebrum get more effective? And probably most people sort of learn this but didn't understand this when they were first playing, but often instructors will have you play long notes. Why are you playing long notes? Because the cerebrum needs time to process as it's making different movements in your mouth, in your tongue, in the way you control your breath, as guitar play with your fingers or whatever. But it needs a repetition to start building patterns for saying, okay, so when you come back to that note, I'm going to know exactly all the different 1,001 modifications to make in the vocal chamber, in your throat, in your breath, all that sort of stuff. So I need the pattern over again, and with long tones in particular, especially for brass and woodwind players, where your resonance in your tone your ability to incorporate overtones gives lots of color to the tone and makes for a really great sound. That all needs time. The cerebrum needs time to hear the resonance and make subtle adjustments to that. If you just blast through your notes, cerebrum doesn't hear enough feedback to be able to pick that up, to start building on that. And so one of the things that happens with this is playing long enough. One of the things I do just to to help that part of my brain go on, for instance, on brass instruments, is I'll stuff a practice mute in that basically emits no sound, but allows me to feel the resonance in the horn. So as I'm playing, my brain's just getting feedback on how much the horn is vibrating as I play, because I want that vibration in the horn, because that's going to give resonance to sound. The other thing that helps the cerebrum a lot, and I feel like most people don't, it's a gold mine, most people don't use it, is record yourself. Record yourself all the time. Yeah. Listen back, play it, record. Why? Because the brain needs time to go, oh, okay. And you'll notice if you'll just play it and then record and play and rinse and repeat, it's like your brain picks up, okay, I understand how to do that articulation. Ooh, I want to change. And it's able to make adjustments that if you just blast through stuff and then move on to next, your brain doesn't get the time. And in fact, if you've ever played a gig where you thought, wow, I sounded really good, and then you go back and record and you go, ooh, it didn't sound as much as I
or vice versa, right? Sometimes it's vice versa.
But that recording process is something that the brain really needs to hear back, because when we're in the moment, we don't quite hear ourselves the same way.
Right.
And the brain doesn't have a chance to change or make responses.
Right.
Does that help?
That 100% helps. I do see this feedback as well when I give assignments to students to say, all right, record yourself doing this assignment and post it. And I find, a big comment I get is people, they do the assignment the first time and then realize, oh, I didn't quite have that there. Oh, let's do it again. And then that also deals with that repetition. Now, let me ask, so you're talking about long tones. Does this connect as well with practicing slowly? Like if you start by practicing slowly, or is this along the same lines as what you're talking about?
It is. If you think about all the muscle movements on your hand when you're playing down the fret on a guitar, it's like, okay, move that 2 millimeters. What? You're not even conscious of that. Well, part of your brain's conscious because your fingers are moving. So we're talking to that cerebrum part of your brain again. And again, we want to build good patterns. So you can either build sloppy patterns or good patterns. The brain wants to build a pattern. It's going to try and craft, okay, what did Brent just do on the neck so I can repeat it again? So if you play it slower and correctly, you're going to build the pattern you want to build on. Versus playing fast and it's kind of half there, you just build a pattern that's sloppy.
Right. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, like our initial reaction is, I want to play this fast. I want to play this up to speed. And that can be just a fail right there, just the wrong way to start. So now you're also talking about like feeling that vibration, talking about the particular mute you put in your horn. Explain to me a little bit further why that's helping your cerebrum.
It's another sensory input that your brain can use. So again, the brain wants input. So like if I'm standing in my studio and I play a G on my trombone or flugelhorn, I have one sense. I get some auditory input through my ears based on the acoustics of the room and stuff like that. So I can adjust it, and my brain will start adjusting kind of what I'm doing with my mouth and my throat and my breath and my chops as I'm playing. But it's a little bit of frequency, and that changes a lot. But I give myself another whole route into this or brain feedback by just sensing resonance on the horn.
So it's exercising one of your sensory items
inputs
to fit, so that you're like, oh, that feels like this when I do this. That's the repetition.
It really amplifies that sensory input. Let's see. A couple of years ago, I got a new flugelhorn. I got a wood from Interbitten in Switzerland, and what was fascinating about the horn beyond the sound was when I would play it, the whole horn would resonate. I could feel the vibration of the horn, the way they built the horn, and I want any sensory input that's additional that I can help my brain sort of get. Yeah, that's the way to move your chops. That's the way to move your mouth to get that kind of resonance and that color in the horn. Then I know I'm hitting it.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, great. So now, speaking of senses, I know this is one of your talking points. Let's talk a little bit the auditory versus the visual side of learning. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I know we were kind of going with those senses just now, so I think that's a great next point to start working on.
It was interesting. I remember a few years ago. So I should say, when I started as a psychologist, I was doing a lot of therapy, but I also ended up consulting at Rancho Los Amigos Hospital on the brain injury board. So I got really involved in how the brain functions and particularly how to help people recover from brain injuries, car accidents, all sorts of other sorts of stuff. And throughout the years, up even till this last project I was working on, we were reinventing how people learn for refugees coming into Europe and using virtual reality and mobile apps. And articulating a different way people could quickly pick up language and sort of cultural rules. If you were coming from Syria, for instance, and trying to sort of assimilate into the culture in Germany. And part of what emerged out of that was there's a huge part of the brain that's really focused on vision, and up to 30% of all your sort of, if you can think about your brain as sort of large computer, part of all that processing power, 30% of it at least is devoted just to vision. So we see things, we understand what we see, we see notes on a page, that comes really a lot more quickly than hearing. And in fact, hearing has sort of the neural mechanisms of about 3% of the brain. So it's really 1/10 of sort of neurons that are available to sort of assimilate into hearing versus vision. So suddenly it's like, wow, it's really a lot easier just to see stuff and kind of learn stuff by what I see. So I don't really learn to improvise, but I can play the notes in a jazz chart. Got it. But if there's no notes, I don't have vision, so now I don't know what to do.
Yeah. This sounds like the big challenge I hear from everybody, especially classical musicians that are trying to start to learn how to improvise. They're like, wow, I could play any note on a page. It doesn't matter what it is, how difficult it is. But when it comes to improvising, I feel like I'm jumping off a cliff.
So this I want to talk about then, how do you develop the ear, which has already less sort of mechanisms in the brain to develop. It can still be developed. And in fact, some people have it hugely developed, but how does one do that? And my mom was a classical flute player, played in orchestra and stuff like that. And it was fascinating trying to get her to play jazz. And because the phrasing was wrong, and it was, that whole dotted eights, it was always straight eights for her and stuff like it was a different language, right? So when you think about sort of learning a different language, and by the way, I got involved in this in Europe a lot because all the words and the ways you frame words in German are so different than if you come from Afghanistan that it's like, you can't just print the characters. By the way, their characters are different than our characters and the German characters. So the characters are different. So visually, you couldn't even get there. So auditorily, you had to be able to hear it. You had to hear the sounds and a very different sound. So what happens in terms of playing jazz is we teach, and it's kind of one of my beefs with the way people learn jazz or struggle with learning jazz, is that it's all very visual. So here's the C scale. Okay, here's a minor scale. Okay, so I see that as well. So it's all seeing, right? So here's the note, here's the staff, here's that note above the staff, recognizing, so it's all visual stuff. And then if I'm a young aspiring player, so I'm reading through this chart and suddenly I see G minor 7th and a C7, and it's like, oh, what am I supposed to play over that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's where the ear comes in, and especially if I don't hear anything. And so I'm trying to listen for what's in my head. I don't hear it, so just play something. So then what happens is that we typically fall, if nothing, besides being embarrassed and anxious and sweating as you see that part of the chart coming up and you know that you're up next and it's like, oh, good grief, what am I going to do? how I learn, and I see a lot of people teaching jazz, is they teach a very left brain. So it's left brain tends to learn things very sort of linear. Easiest way I could frame that is our left brain is how we learn multiplication tables.
Right.
So we all need to learn our multiplication tables, and we could do it by flashcards, and we need to learn 3 by 5 and what is 9 times 9 to be able to do any kind of basic stuff in math. And the same thing in jazz, we all need to learn sort of what the basic scales are and what the first and third and fifth and seven is. But that won't allow you to create sort of a creative piece. It'll provide just sort of a structure over here. It'll be like painting by numbers, and you'll be easily able to see kind of a painting done that way. And you'll see certain players play, and you can tell they're really playing off their left brain because they move up and down scales
yes.
in a way that feels kind of routinized, if I could say it that way or whatever. It's very structured, and it's like, okay. And if you listen to them, you can hear them doing kind of the same approach. So how do you get the ear involved in the right brain? So here's the fun thing about that. The ear really can be developed partly just by practicing what you can hear. So you think about if what you're going to develop a library of things you can hear. One of the ways to do it, and Mike Lake really helped me with this in our initial collaborative work, was simply saying, what if you had to play in your horn or on your instrument simple tunes that you already know in your head so you can hear them, like Happy Birthday, or When the Saints Go Marching In. And so just beginning to develop the ability to hear something in your brain and then play it on your instrument. Because when we start out, those aren't connected. Almost anyone can whistle Happy Birthday, but that doesn't mean they could play it on their instrument. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean they could play it on an instrument in multiple keys. Oof, even more of a challenge. So we have this challenge that the brain needs to be able to hear stuff and then be able to reproduce it on your instrument of choice in real time.
Yes.
And that...
Yep.
Go ahead.
100%. This makes so much sense to me. When I talk about learning licks or anything like that, I always talk about learning in all 12 keys. Well, first of all, not learning it off a piece of sheet music, hearing it first and internalizing that. I love also what you're talking about is just tunes that we all know that you maybe know that are pop songs you grew up with, being able to actually connect. I call that connecting your ear to your instrument. And because there's one thing to obviously develop some of those fundamentals of ear training, which are, in my opinion, important. But there's also this other side of creating that connection. I think that's a fantastic way, or melodic dictation is another thing that I like to teach others to do as well. Does that all sound like that's along the lines of what you're preaching here? Yeah,
more than along the lines, it's right in the pocket. By the way, there's some interesting things you can do which we don't typically set up in recording that'll help with that. So instead of taking a song like All Things You Are, which moves through all sorts of chord changes and keys very rapidly, actually to help your ear develop, you're better off to take a single chord or whatever, stay with that, listen to it as you're playing it. If you got a mic, whistle a line or sing a line, then try and play that same line. It's that repetition actually help your ear develop a lot quicker than playing rapidly through a series of chord changes. It's interesting. So that simple, can you sing it, then can you play it, is a really good connection that helps the ear develop in the brain.
Yeah.
And you can use it over and over again, and being able to practice it. So, because what will happen is especially when this is just beginning developing for improvisation, is you'll start playing and you kind of hear a line, and by the time you sort of get it out, you get about 3/4 of the notes as you hear them, but then some note also kicks in. You kind of lose consciousness of what that line was. Then the chord changes. Oops, now you're adjusting to the next one. It's all too fast for the brain to actually do it. So you want to slow that whole thing down and just sort of repeat the ability to hear a chord background, be able to sing a line, hear a line, be able to play that same line you hear, and just help the brain make that loop so that becomes just more immediate and facile.
Which goes back to what you're talking about, the cerebrum and that repetition. So, okay, so for what I'm hearing from this section here, it's way easier to visualize things and see things, that where our brain works. And but really, I think you said only 3% is
right.
Of hearing. So
auditory.
For auditory. So we're at a disadvantage here already when it comes to jazz improvisation, because really to become a great jazz improviser, or any kind of improviser really, it's all about hearing, and that's why it is a little bit of a barrier for some. But we also need to have those left-brained skills, the visual side, being able to read music, being able to understand scales. All this stuff is great, but then there's that hearing side. So we need to work on those hearing skills, and especially the act of reproducing what we're already able to hear on our instruments. Did I get that right, or did I miss something?
You got it perfect.
Oh, Thank you. Awesome. I'm listening. Okay, this is so far, Rodney. This is just absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for just laying down all this value for me and the audience here. Where do we go next here? What's the next tip?
I was thinking, what questions since we bounced through so much, come to mind of anything we talked about?
Well, I would love to talk a little bit more about like the left brain versus right brain sort of learning, sort of this more analytical side. I guess we were talking about a little bit with theory, right? Theory, scales. What notes do you play over a G7 chord, right? But then where does the right brain come into play?
So here's the interesting thing in your development of the right brain.
Well, actually, first, can we talk about what is the left brain and what is the right brain? Like, because we hear that, but what does that really mean?
That's really splitting your brain is actually split up top. So you have a left and a right hemisphere in your brain, and has all your primary functioning, and it's split in the middle with a corpus callosum, which is sort of a connection between the two. So the two are connected, but they have both overlapping functions, but they have some distinct functions as well. And so the right brain tends to learn things by association. Let me give you a language one, for instance, so you understand. So let's say I'm coming from Iran, and I've escaped, and I'm as an immigrant, and I am moved to Germany, and I want to sort of assimilate there. And as I'm walking down the street, I see a cute girl I'd like to say hello to, and I'm a 25-year-old guy, and a long ways away from home. My left brain says, "Oh, how do I say hello?" And so the left brain is going to construct it by, quick, where's my dictionary? I'm going to look alphabetically down for hello here, and it says, it's a G word. Okay, this is a very linear approach, right? I'm going to put the characters together, try and sound it out and stuff like that. If you happen along at the same time and you said, Rodney, just say Guten Tag. That's pretty easy. I got that auditorily. The brain learns it because it's easy to learn because I want to say that, and that girl's cute. And that whole attachment and something that would be fun to do makes it quick. And I learned Guten Tag in 1 second. And by the way, I'll be able to say it to the next cute girl as well. And I'll be able to use it in all sorts of places, right? And so, wow, what a different way of learning, right? That's right brain learning. Right brain is attachment. I put things together based on connections. So I'm always building connections. And once I get a connection, I can build on it, and so I can move it all sorts of ways. So it's a very different way from learning versus here, spell out Guten Tag, sound it out. What does that sound like? Remember to use Guten Tag, and in this situation, very linear. So
when it comes to improvisation, would the left brain be very much so along the lines of kind of the example I gave before? In a G, what notes can you play over a G7 chord? Well, one example is you could play the Mixolydian mode. Well, that's very linear thinking. That's very,
right.
Here are these choices. There's a lot of limitations to thinking that way, by the way. But is that along the left brain side?
It is. In fact, I studied under a trombone player initially as a kid, and he was a great player, but it was funny listening to him improvise because he always started out on the fifth. Every time he would start an ad-lib solo, whatever the key was, he would start on the fifth of the first chord. Okay. And he would camp there. And then he would kind of start from there. So it was his safe place. So literally, didn't really matter what he might have been feeling in response to the song. He would approach it with, what's a safe note? 1, 3, 5, or 7, that sort of stuff. That'd be very left brain. Got to know it, because it keeps you playing in the key. Right brain might be saying, what do you feel at this moment? How would you like to express that? What if I play in the wrong key? Well, I'm trying to feel it, but it's in the wrong key. It doesn't come out right. So I really need the left and the right brain, both coordinated or functioning when I'm playing jazz.
Is there one that is more important in your opinion, or the one that should take more prevalence, or should they be both equally involved?
I think you need to work more on the right side of your brain. to be really comfortable in jazz, but you need both.
And how would you do that? How would you work more on just kind of what you described, what you were thinking there was, what do I want to express? Like how do you actually practice that?
One of the things I was just describing is could you take a single phrase, whether it's a one chord phrase or a 2-5-1 phrase or whatever, and begin to force yourself to say, how would I sing this? Sing a line over, whistle a line over it.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. Why do I say whistle or sing? Because that doesn't require any technical skills with your instrument. You can just use your voice or whatever to begin hearing a line.
Yeah.
I also find listening to people that you enjoy listening to, grab a line that they do, and so that your brain enjoys, and so you can kind of memorize that. So you begin to put that into your library of things I know I can hear in my head, and then play those over chord changes. That again helps develop that sort of whole perspective.
What I like about everything that we're talking about is I can also see how the different ones play together. For example, we started out talking about our brains learn best when we're having fun. That's something that you were just touching on there. We then talked about working with your cerebrum and the need for time and repetition. Like that was, you just described that right there. Auditory versus visual, working on the ear training, the hearing, the singing part, the things that you can actually hear. That's there. And then we're talking about working hard on that right brain. Yes, we need the left brain, but that right brain, everything seems to work together amazingly. And you've given some amazing examples today of how to actually work through these things. But it's also super great just to sort of have this outlined, like these, if you don't mind, I want to call them brain hacks, like these little hacks. Sure. that are just like, if we were paying attention to all these things, man, we're going to learn so much faster. Thanks for this. Is there any other big points that you want to make about this today?
I think the final thing I would say, which I don't know that it goes left or right brain, it's just you as the person, but it's back to the psychology of it all, is when I'm improvising, I want to play something that moves me. Mm. And so ultimately that's also I feel like a helpful feedback when I'm listening to myself as well. I'm listening for notes that move me. And that's a real sort of difference, I think, for people which are moving away from, did I play the right notes exactly, or did I play this phrase in the exact way? It's more like, could you focus on what kind of moves your heart as you hear that? Ooh, does that capture a certain feeling? I want that ooh feeling inside. And that's what the improvisation for me is driving towards. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. And I think that I was a guest on someone else's podcast recently, and I was talking a little bit about these musical moments that keep us coming back. That, music can really beat us up a lot. And you've been a therapist, so maybe you probably understand a lot about people dealing with the negative self-talk and all this stuff. Music can beat us up. We have high moments, very low moments. But the things that keep making us come back are these musical moments that transcend the possibilities of what we thought was possible. When you interlock with a group of musicians at a gig or maybe even a jam session and something magical happens, so something more than like your actual, what you thought you were capable of, or what you thought music that you could create for other people is capable of, breaks through. And those are those cloud nine moments that just really stand out. And that really is, for that to happen, you need to be able to focusing on that, expressing yourself, how to make a moment that moves you actually happen, not how to hit every single chord perfectly. So it sounds like you're playing perfect bebop, not how to, play wailing fast over Cherokee at 300 BPM. None of that is really that important, right? It's playing stuff that moves you. So I completely resonate with that. It was back on, what episode? Oh no, I'm not forgetting the episode number. I had a student on for one of my courses, and one thing he was struggling with, we had a little coaching call on the podcast. One thing he was struggling with was, trying to play by the rules, trying to make sure I was playing all the chord tones, trying to make sure I was doing this. We did a little exercise on the podcast where I had him play quote unquote free. And by that I mean not avant-garde, just simply trying to play without restrictions, without chords. Just try to create melodies that you were hearing and allow for something to happen that maybe you would consider to be a wrong note, but then go ahead and try to make something musical from that and just letting yourself dream and explore. That just sounds like it's so perfect. So, yeah.
That's a big space to give yourself, isn't it? It's absolutely great space. By the way, I don't know if you experience this as well, but when you're in that moment where that sort of magical moment, there's a sense in which the sounds you're doing are actually connecting with your emotions. So you're not just playing something, you're actually feeling something, which is the cool thing about jazz, I think. And what I also notice is that in that flow, time gets suspended. So I experience time differently. I notice when I'm in that flow, especially for a long period of time, I lose sense of time. I'm just in the moment. Mm-hmm. And which again is capturing that sort of whole brain, and emotions are all tied into the brain as well. But when those are all connected, wow, that's special.
100%. And for those of you, by the way, that episode I was referring to was episode 142, creating melodic jazz solos in the art of not thinking, coaching call for my students. And so I just, Rodney, where can people learn more about you? What would you like to put? I know you have a book that you've collaborated on. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I collaborated with Mike Lake on a book called The Brain-Friendly Method for Musical Instrument Excellence. And actually, I'd worked with him on an earlier book also on trombone improvisation. He's a great resource to look up. His name is Mike Lake, and his website is altotrombone.com. He's an alto trombone player. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll post my website for you here as well coming up. I'm over on bamzookle.com or rodneybrim.bamzookle.com.
Awesome. We're going to have all of those in the show notes today, so you can go ahead and find all of this as show notes. We'll have the link to the book and his LinkedIn and everything. Well, Rodney, thank you so much for being on the show. This was awesome. I learned a lot. I'm a better person for having known you now, and I know that my audience is too. I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing what you know. I have a feeling that we're going to check in with each other sometime down the line, have you on again.
Cool.
So thanks for being on.
Sounds good, Brett. Thank you.
Hey, that was fantastic, wasn't it? I mean, that was just a lot of great information. Big thanks to Rodney Brim for just laying down a lot of great information for all of us. I know I learned a lot today from him. And I was just thinking about those 4 main points that he went through. And if we actually start applying those in our daily practice or weekly practice, whenever it is you practice, that we can really start getting some serious results. So I want you to take action. I want you to start thinking about those things, how you can start applying it, because obviously those who take action, they're the ones who get results. And those who just think about it, well, they don't really get the results. So make sure you take action on today's episode. As I always ask, hey, if you really enjoyed this episode today, if you enjoyed this show in general, give back. Really simple, free way to do that is simply by going to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a positive, or dare I say a 5-star rating and review. Just helps other people know that the show's worth listening to and that it's helpful, and that they should be listening to it too. So thank you so much in advance for taking the time to do that. Make sure, of course, you are subscribed so you don't miss any shows. Make sure you're signed up for the newsletter so you don't miss anything that goes out on Learn Jazz Standards. That's learnjazzstandards.com/newsletter. I'm looking forward to seeing you back next week on Learn Jazz Standards podcast. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the LJS podcast, brought to you by LearnJazzStandards.com. Subscribe to the series on iTunes, and don't forget to join our jazz community at LearnJazzStandards.com/newsletter.